Greetings. Welcome to the How We Do Digital Ministry podcast. I'm Christopher Harris, founder of Faith Growth. You can find us online at faithgrowth.com, where we help our church clients build their digital presence and engage with their community online. On this podcast, I have a conversation with a church leader and ask them to share how they do digital ministry in their own community. Today, I am talking with the Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow. He is the pastor and head of staff at First Presbyterian Church in Palo, Alto, California. Bruce, please introduce yourself and tell us how you do digital ministry.
Oh, hey. Well, Chris, so glad to be here with you and everything you're doing. It's been a long time since we've been together, and so I'm glad to be here. So yeah, I'm Bruce Reyes-Chow. I have been engaged in technology and social media and everything pretty much since it started. I'm a Gen X kid that was in high school when we switched from typing to keyboarding, and I learned how to program in Fortran and COBOL and all that stuff early on, and then realized I hated that part of it, but I loved what we did with it. And so my ministry has always been as an early adopter to social media and technology, and to figure out how to use it not just as a tactic, but as a way of engaging, extending our expressions of relationship. So I'm one that has done that for many years. Everything from running a worship service on Twitter 10 years ago that we ran every Sunday, to starting an online community, starting an in-person congregation, but using social media and technology as kind of the water we swam in and air we breathe. And now I'm at a more traditional space where, like many people and many churches, shifted to an online experience for worship. And we're now, as we're putting it, just beginning to plan to add an in-person option to our ongoing worship experience. So we're doing a very specific, intentional, robust hybrid experience coming into the fall, and continue to help church I'm serving now to tell its story, which means using technologies and the socials, as the kids call it, a little bit differently than they had used to do it. So it's interesting. We're doing some staffing conversations right now. By the time this comes out, we will probably have somebody that is our chief storyteller, our digital storyteller, which is we're thinking about creating some staffing around that, which I'm very excited about. So there you go. I use it in a lot of ways.
I like that. We'll come back to digital storyteller in a second, but
yep.
One of the things that I keyed in on first when you were saying that is that you're very intentional. You're going to add an in-person experience.
Yes.
And I like that language. Why it jumped out at me so much is I think there's a lot of people reopening,
mm-hmm.
or this, or we're going to go back. And to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like y'all are very intentionally saying, hey, we're here and we're going to consider what's next and what will that look like going forward instead of maybe going back.
Yeah.
Is that true? Or can you say how
very true. Our language is super intentional because we have been talking about, we're not closed, we're not done, we're still being church, and church just happens to take place on Sundays for our worship online and in this remote virtual space. And like many places, we've connected with people that have reconnected with us, new people. And the church I serve, I think it lives in a unique theological and political space. And so we've attracted people who otherwise couldn't be with us. And I love this space. Folks, in many ways, I made it very easy for us to transition into the space, which I think it's great. And then also folks like, oh, it was easy. I'm like, well, it wasn't really easy. I've been doing this a long time. My 10,000 hours have been put in greatly. So we talk to our people. A lot of our folks are not going to come back. They're just like, this is great. I love and this is our seniors. I love rolling out of bed and I tell them, I assume that you're all fully dressed, but they're like, I only got a halfway dressed. And I'm like, well, let's just assume everybody's all the way dressed.
Yes.
And, so I think what's going to happen is folks are going to, if we do this well, you're going to have a meaningful worship experience, no matter how you show up and where you show up. And so some people are going to come once a month in person and then stay the rest of the time remotely. Others are just going to be remote. And others, like many places, are certainly just want to be back on site, which I honor as well. So the language is super intentional to not lift up one over the other, but to just say this is all part of the worship experience that we offer into the world.
Well, and I like that, it's kind of not rushing back to anything, but kind of analyzing how are we going forward. Kind of, to me, there seems to be a little bit of also acknowledgement that things have changed because of the pandemic. It's not just the pandemic caused this. Now the pandemic's winding down. I don't think it's at an end yet, but what we do definitely see signs that it's winding down, at least in this country. And, so there's some people that are really looking, oh, okay, now we can just go back to, I guess what I'm most concerned about is any church that just goes back to like a full schedule this fall without really analyzing resources and how can we be most effective and, where are we at? You have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I've been doing a lot of talking about hybrid, and I think that's the sexy thing right now, as of the beginning of June. And I've actually been encouraging churches not to do hybrid because I think most of our churches don't have the capacity to do it. And I think it feels like another program that they can just plug in and then everybody's going to come to church and we're going to grow. And I've been really pushing on folks to think thoughtfully about what kind of online presence they can offer so that they can do it well. If it's streaming, I think we kind of see this idea that we rank the way that we participate in remote spaces. And I'm just like, you got to do what makes sense for your community. One, what's your capacity? Two, that's not for just resources, that's staffing, that's everything. And I think many of our congregations feel like it's a survival strategy versus expression of the gospel strategy. And that's where I think we're going to see, my guess is most churches will no longer have a online expression that in the next year. I feel like, and I know people are like, well, that's kind of cynical. I'm like, well, but if we just rush into this, it's just gonna fail. And so that's kind of where I am with that. I do it well, do what you have the capacity to do. So there's a few thoughts.
I would agree with you there because I was doing live streaming at my church in Dallas, or I even helped install everything going back to 2012. And so I'm very, and we had remote cameras and everything, but I'll tell you pre-pandemic, what we were doing as live streaming really was just giving you a seat in the back of the room. You got to see everybody's heads. You were watching worship, not really participating. And I just know, I kind of agree with you, having done that, and I know what that experience is because I've produced it for many years, for almost 8 years. Before COVID, and I just don't think that is enough anymore because when you just get right in front of your camera, the intimacy that the leader is able to make, and it's not this long shot or a wide shot or whatever from way back. It's like they're just talking to you because that's literally the only person they have to talk to is that camera. And so I think you're right. Some people. There might be, I've talked with another pastor that, he's kind of thinking about hybrid, like, baseball, like there's I don't know, you probably know Pastor Rich Hong in New Jersey.
Yeah.
So he was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago and he used the analogy of baseball. Like it's, you have an experience when you're in the stadium that's more limited view, but there's, take me out to the ballpark and all those things that are going to happen in between innings and, on TV, you have commentators, you have replays and all that. And so I think he's thinking right, but like, man, that's a lot of extra work to put on, put on a hybrid. And I don't know that everybody's thinking that much.
Well, and they, I think pastors have done a great job at just figuring all this out and just doing it. And I think that that's great. But, now that we're also being expected for good reason to now see people in person, right? To spend 2 hours on a visit, to do this other stuff. And then folks want worship to continue on. And I don't blame them for thinking that it can just happen because it's been happening. Yeah. But I think churches, unless they're willing to invest in staff that helps to make this happen, you're just going to burn out your pastors and tech people who have just kind of found themselves as now the tech person, not seen as a ministry position, but really just like your help. They're getting burned out. I just feel like we have to take a bigger view about how we do church well. And I think that's where we fall back into this. If we just have the right program, if we just have the right steps, we're going to save the church. And I like technology doesn't save the church. It just doesn't do it. But we all want it to. And So I think this is going to be another very hard lesson for a lot of places and a lot of frustration. Again, I'm all kind of sunshine about it, but yeah.
Yeah. There's no denying that technology gives us a lot of potential, but it's not in and of itself the solution. I mean, the solution is the same story we've been telling for
Right.
2,000 years. It's
Right.
it's the grace and the redemption of Jesus Christ, but now we're presenting it a new way, which means we have to learn that new way, become effective at
Which
it.
is why when I mentioned kind of I had this idea about this congregation serving now is to create this position of digital storyteller, that we really see it as you're helping us to tell our story in a different way and in a different space. And so we're working on kind of what is that, how do we craft that, what does that look like? So I'm very excited about the possibilities that we have here to do some of this work.
You know what I like about the term digital storyteller a little bit more than, because the other one that you see a lot of times is communication director or something like that. And
Yeah.
I think communication directors, a lot of them do tech well, but I think there's two ways to do tech as a church. One is a ministry tool, and one is just, like a bulletin board in the cloud. And I think too often the communication director is just helping, that here's when this meeting is, here's when Sunday school here. Not that that's not important, but to me, when you start thinking through the lens of digital storyteller and how are we telling this story, our story, and the story the bigger story we're a part of, that to me speaks more to the ministry angle, which excites me more, because the communication angle is important, but I don't know. Sometimes I think all it is
that's not a sexy title.
Well, exactly. Well, it's like to me, it's like all we did. If that's where we stop with online ministry, then all we did was take the bulletin board out of the Narthex and put it in the cloud.
Yeah.
While that's more efficient, it's not that much more exciting for ministry.
Well, and it doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't. Yeah.
It's still just kind of a bulletin board in the cloud. And so I like that. Digital storyteller. And kind of on that front, there's a question I love to, jumping off from there's a question I like to ask everybody, and you have probably many examples over the many years you've been online, but I always like to find maybe a tangible example where you've seen God at work online or encountered God, where is somewhere you've encountered or seen God at work online?
Oh, so I have a couple of stories I share about that. But one is, I've been very involved with around issues around gun violence and gun control and all those kind of things for years. My brother-in-law was shot and killed about 12 years ago. And, everywhere I've served, there have been people impacted by gun violence in their life at some point. And it's just, so I've always done that. And, as you can imagine, when you're doing that on an online space, it gets pretty heated, right? I mean, have had to report a threat, a physical threat that we've felt like they're threatening our family and other, just not just trolls, but people who see conversations about guns as an opportunity to just reinforce violence. So I had this amazing interaction. I genuinely want to engage with people online. And so when somebody comes at me, I don't immediately react. I will kind of actually check. I visit people's Twitter threads and kind of see, is this person who's just going around flaming people, or is this somebody who's actually going to engage? And I will often, if I'm like, maybe I'll say, hey, if you're interested in engaging on this, why do you think I'm wrong? Or here's what I think. I don't, not everybody deserves our time. So, not everybody gets it, but if there are, and I had this kind of amazing conversation, I remember, with this one person who we disagreed on it. And we found this space, like a few interactions back and forth, some in our private messaging and some public, where it was basically, got to the point where it was like, I don't think you're a horrible person anymore. I disagree with you, but I know I can see where you're coming from. And that's all through a person that we've never met. That's the only interaction we've ever had. And, I kind of felt like that's the ideal of what happens in the midst of all the noise, which I don't think there's as much noise as everybody thinks there is, but when we engage well. But, I think that's one of those times where I was like, this is a tough issue, passionate, life or death kinds of consequences to where we land as a country and as a people. And yet we could find a way to honor the God leading in both of us. And I think that was, you don't get to see that very often, and really felt a genuine, like, okay, now we're going to vote differently. We're going to continue, but maybe we were both changed a little bit interactions with other people in the future.
Kind of, yeah, recognizing the humanity and the God in each of us. And sometimes without that engagement, it's easier to more kind of just objectify, if you will. They're a set of beliefs. They're not really this, imago Dei, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good example. Well, and for me, that's really honestly at the end of the day where I fell in love with social media, was that you can make true connections that are impactful, and learn a lot. There are bad things there,
Sure.
but there's a lot of good. No, thank you for sharing that. What I know, another thing I'm kind of curious about is I know that, especially when COVID hit, many church leaders turned to you like, hey, how do we do this? And you've been doing a lot of mentoring and even have some Facebook groups to help people do worship online and everything. What are maybe some, if you had to, just based on that experience, could you give us some wisdom, best practices, or what would your kind of top 3 suggestions for anybody as they're as they're coming back to in-person hybrid, what would you suggest?
Oh my gosh, this is an awesome question, and when they change all the time. I mean, I probably have a list of 30 things to do, but I think the number one thing is keep it simple. I think most people technology vomit all over everything, and I think that we have this inclination that everything has to be super fancy and sweet. No, and I've always been very much like, we don't stream, we just use Zoom meetings, and we use all the bells and whistles from Zoom. I use Google Slides, and I have super high needs about how things look. So simple. I kind of make it kind of like sound people when they say, if nobody notices us, then we did our job.
Yeah.
And I kind of am like, if nobody notices the technology, then you've created a space where you're just worshiping. Like, now it's the technology is going to happen, the goofs and things, but limit the times that you give an opportunity for technology gremlins to wreak havoc. So I think most people were doing far too many transitions, far too much sharing, too much, back and forth. Just a lot. So that's one thing, is just keep it as simple as possible. Remove as many technological transitions as possible. Mm-hmm. I would say the second thing, and the third and fourth thing would be to practice. I think most people don't have the technology muscle to do this, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you can't strengthen it and stretch it and everything, but again, I've been doing online worship services and things for years, and so I love the space and can flip around things and move things and not freak out and all that pretty easily. But why would anybody else, if you're not doing that, expect to be able to just cruise right into leading online worship? And I think for folks needing to practice that, get feedback on their language, on what they're doing. And that would lead me to my third, I think, would be to think about reimagining rather than replication. So if we think about our online space as an actual different space, then we take advantage of all the things that are happening, and all the ways you can express offering that was so locked into passing a plate in most places. Well, now what does offering look like? Take advantage of the space and reimagine now, play with it. Again, the technology and the things we can do while keeping things simple still are just vast. So, we do completely Zoom based worship. So, I play with spotlights all the time. We do polls on occasion, though not too much. We do very little pre-recording. That's personal for me, but also our congregation, they're very clear they don't like it. So, so keep it simple, practice like that think about it as a muscle, so that you don't feel guilty about not being able to do it, but you think of it as a muscle that needs to be trained and strengthened. And then to just to reimagine things rather than just try to do what you were doing before and just have it happen half it online. And I think that's the piece that makes our virtual experiences just boring and not engaging, is that we've just tried to place everything we did on person and do it online with the camera.
Yeah, because probably I think one of the most awkward experiences I had during, quarantine worship was like okay, now we're live stream. We're all going to recite the Apostles' Creed. I thought that was the most crazy thing in the world.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Kind of using the way we would do it in a worship service in person. And I'm just like, this is odd.
Yeah. Well, and
I'm saying it, but I'm supposed to say it with you. And
yeah. And camera angles are the worst part too. I'm like, the best part about Zoom is we get to see each other right here. Like, why do we put so many cameras so far away? So it just makes you feel so distant from the people. And when we do, like, that's the reason our Zoom worship has worked, is because people are seeing people. Like, they're not seeing this, they're not observing worship like what in-person worship often is. So, and then digital worship in many ways is just streaming what's happening in person. So I was like, take advantage of these faces that you have versus anyway. So that's why we're Zoom.
I found it interesting. So the church that I've been worshiping with during most of I started last August. I kind of joined. Well, I technically have not joined, but I started worshiping with a new community in the middle of the pandemic. And one of the things that I always found interesting is they do live stream, but they're a New York based church, so they couldn't even get to their building to do things together.
Right.
So they had to figure out how to stream from multiple apartments. And they have a Zoom, and some people, you can go there. I kind of got introduced to them on Facebook Live and like that. So there's people in the comments. There's also some people that kind of watch the whole thing on Zoom. And then when the weather got better, they got small groups that wanted to go to the park in New York and were bringing computers and watching it together. And I always liked that. Okay, so we've done this, and now we've given, hey, there's people that really want to chat with each other, like on Zoom, so they can participate that way. There's people, I was fine with the live stream and the chat on Facebook, and then there's people that even were getting together into the park. And I always really appreciated that they were making all of that available. And they're really they're really being discerning right now about what does hybrid mean, because we want to keep our people at home, and people like me that are coming in from Dallas to New York. How do they?
Well, and how do you not just center everything on one experience? Like, that was one of the things we're really trying to, when the inertia to recenter it back in the in-person space is really strong. Yeah. And so how do you make sure that you don't do that? And I think Zoom provides one opportunity for that, so we're setting up our equipment in the church, and I'm like, there's a camera going to be right here. Like, it's so distracting for the people that are in person. I'm like, yeah, it is. But that's your reminder that you're not the only people in the space.
Well, I like that. It's almost like, and to me, the analogy would be, well, just pretend that's the back of somebody's head sitting in front in the pew in front of you, because it's not. Don't look at it as like that is representation of the people that are not in this room that are worshiping with us. And if they were in the room and they were in front of you, you'd see the back of their head, literally. It would not be a clear shot necessarily. But yeah, I'm glad you're pulling those cameras up and not. Yeah. That was like the church I was doing the live streaming at. All of our cameras were mounted in the back, and we never really had that great of shots. And
it was just. I mean, we built our technology to be invisible, and part of it is like, well, part of this where we moved into it actually needs to disrupt what we were doing in person, because what most churches were doing in person was observing anyway. I mean, I think folks would like to pretend that they were interactive, and they really weren't. So now we've given this great opportunity and experience of actually being interactive. And now how do we continue that in meaningful and proficient ways? I mean, we're not looking at perfection, but I want to provide an experience that's meaningful, and that means understanding and using the technology well.
So tell me, do you have any thoughts, as we kind of look to, right now the church is very centered on, how are we going to do worship kind of going forward in hybrid? And that is, rightly so. But I also am kind of thinking, as we're coming back together and, do you have any thoughts on, where might we be in 5-10 years looking at technology, or how we even initiate relationships and, what does that look like for the church? Not just the worship piece, but other pieces.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think everything but worship is going to naturally change. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, worship is one of those things that you start touching that, it's like the third rail, and don't mess with my relationship with God. But, you talk about a committee meeting and they're like, yeah, let's figure out how we do that better. So I think committee meetings, some small groups, all of that. I think folks have just been like, this is great. I can just show up for we do adult ed on Monday nights, and it's an hour long. We brought people in from all over the country, and folks love it. I'm not driving a half an hour either, both ways with my preparation and everything, and I can just roll up with a drink in my hands, eating whatever, and I get an hour of content. I'm interact, and then so I think those things. I think folks are going to be super willing to continue that kind of thing. Our session is, we're contemplating not meeting in person, even when we can, because we're trying to integrate a hybrid culture into our world. So we're going to have, I hope, elders, those who govern Presbyterian churches, who are not in our city. And so we'll have to be like, if we're going to be, the thing about remote or hybrid worship for me is, be really clear about what the possibility for engagement is from people. Otherwise, we get into the trap of you can come and you can give, but you can't actually participate in the leadership of the church.
Yeah.
And that's an okay decision to make, but I think that has to be really clear. Because if I'm starting to be there every Sunday, and why am I not being asked to be on this committee? Well, we only meet in person. Well, then we've decided what world is more important for the life of our congregation. So that's why we're contemplating, okay, maybe all of our committees, they meet, all of our meetings except for one are online. We're thinking about setting up a hybrid room, having just one of our rooms be kind of a hybrid space so that
that's a good idea. Yeah.
You can have committees we use our conference room. That's where you meet if you have one or two people that are going to be distant. So we're playing with this, kind of really letting this seep into other spaces. But I think the rest of the life of the church, it's going to be about clarity. So we're going to revamp our website. I've only been to this church for a couple of years, and most of it's been COVID. But revamping the website and be very clear. Here's our hybrid experiences. Here's our in-person experiences, and here's our virtual experiences, and not build up hierarchy around any of them. So I think it's going to change.
So it's just more. It's not a hierarchy. It's just an opportunity.
Yeah.
Which opportunity works best for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I think those meetings and that stuff is going to be transformed forever. And that's not going to be a hard sell for most of our places.
Well, yeah, I think it solves a lot of problems we've been going up against. It's like, how do we get more, well, for instance, I've heard the thing, like, how do we get more young women involved? Well, you keep meeting when they're having to deal with kids in the evening or stuff, Or, now soccer is killing Sunday school for kids. Well, we could do it at a different time online, or even they can, honestly, this last year, my nieces have loved the head of the Sunday school was just doing a recording every week that had some lesson and some, and some crafts and stuff. And they loved, and they kind of liked the recording because they could stop and work on the craft longer, or, tell the story longer or play the games longer. They actually liked that it was a recording they could do whenever, because they got to do it their way.
Yeah.
And so it solves some of our, I think of a lot of, I don't think it's an easy solve because we got to figure out the best way to do it. But, some of those common things I've heard over the last 10, 15 years of like, we want this, we want these people involved, they're going and playing soccer, so they're not there on Sunday morning or whatever. And so now it's like, hey, we can provide more opportunities. And so that excites me. And I hope that we live into that and figure out the best way to provide those opportunities. I just had a question and it just flew out of my head. I was like, what was it? Oh, I know. Okay. So we're nearing the end of our time. I was wondering if there's any favorite tool, software, hardware, any tech.
What do I do? What do I use?
Yeah. What do you
like many people, I'm a huge Canva user. I just feel like there's no excuse for bad graphics now. I still see them. But even I'm always like, even on Canva, the best thing about Canva is you don't mess with stuff and you can make it look good. But I think what happens is people get in there and they use it in a way that like they're redesigning things. And I'm like, stop doing that. Just stop doing it. I promise it's all there for you. Anyway, so that's what I use Canva all the time. I'm a big Buffer fan, so I use Buffer as my social media piece. So that I'm on those all the time, just trying to make sure we're sharing well and all that. And then Instagram is my happy place. and I think is where we do a lot more engaging and things for me personally. So those are the three that I'm on most of the time. I will say our staff uses Slack, which I'm also a big fan of. Almost all of us are using it really well at our staff. We're trying to get everybody on board, kind of thing. But yeah, so those are ones.
Are you using Slack at all with like the session or other elders, or just the staff?
So we have some of our committee. I mean, this is the Slack only works well if everybody's using it. Yeah. And we're in that transition space of for generations in the congregation I'm serving, and so we haven't quite been able to get everybody to use it. We have moved everybody to Google Drive. All of our session are now submitting their reports into a folder for each month, so you can just click on a folder and all the reports are there. Nice. So we've moved into some spaces that are and part of it is because we added 3 elders who are working people, not retired, and that they've forced. I don't think everybody understands why they don't read every single email every time it comes right in their email box. But I'm like, but that's the reality. I'm like, when you're retired, I love y'all, but not including me, are not on our email all the time and just get right back to you. So
I would doubt the retire. Some businesses, I mean, they wouldn't understand getting 100 emails an hour. And there's some people in business that get that much quantity in the day.
Yeah, it's wild. So we're making baby steps. We're just trying to consolidate into particular areas. So we're trying to go to a Google culture and some other pieces like that. But it takes a while. Yeah, and I think some people also, not everybody's going to get there, and that's okay.
Yeah, but it does. Yeah, if you can get a lot, though, you can get as many as possible. It's so much easier to have those collaborative. I think that's probably the next big thing to take that will help the church as they start finding these collaborative online tools, because some know about them and some have no.
Yeah. And I think part of it is for most of our congregations, the leadership has to be patient, but yet keep pushing. Like, be patient that people don't know how to edit a Google Doc. Not everybody does, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But let's push through, help them along, but don't give up on the collaborative nature that it really, at the end of the day, is going to be a huge benefit to everybody's time, and not just efficiency, but time and actually what we're creating. And I think that's the piece that's most important.
Yeah, it gets a lot of things out of silos so that multiple people really can work and give input, outside of marathon meetings, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time today and being on the podcast. I would like to invite all of our listeners to make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast in their favorite, either on YouTube or in their favorite podcast player that they're listening to us on. Bruce, how can our listeners find and follow you online?
Sure. Yeah. So sometimes people will say, I couldn't find you online. Well, that's a lie, because I'm Reyes-Chow, and I'm the only one in the world, so they didn't look very hard. But I am officially B Reyes-Chow, all run together on everything, on all the socials. So would love to interact, follow, connect with on and I'm mostly on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, like many are. So at B Reyes-Chow, or you can go to my website, which is reyes-chow.com. And there's all kinds of fun stuff there. So I still blog on occasion. All my books are there, social media, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very easy to find.
All right. We'll link to the website and social media accounts in the show notes. So be sure to go follow and interact with Bruce online. Again, thanks for listening. We'd love to connect with you in another way as well. We have a private Facebook group cleverly called How We Do Digital Ministry, after the name of this podcast. It is a place where, for the other 7 days a week, you can interact with other church leaders and find out how they're doing digital ministry in their context, share tips, tricks, and ask questions. Also, in a couple weeks, I'm going to be doing a Q&A show, and we're going to ask y'all to submit all your questions through the group, and that's the questions I'm going to answer on the Q&A. So go join the group so you'll be ready for the call for questions and get your question answered on the podcast episode in a couple weeks. All right, everybody, until next week, blessings and peace to you all.